May 24th, 1990. Livingston County, Michigan. After dropping her mother off at Detroit Metropolitan Airport and spending the afternoon with a friend, 30-year-old Paige Renkowski starts driving home. That evening, her abandoned vehicle is discovered with the engine running on the shoulder of Interstate 96, but Paige has vanished without a trace. Before she went missing, witnesses recalled seeing Paige speak with a man outside her vehicle at that spot, but he is never identified, and the circumstances of Paige's disappearance remain unknown. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest minisode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host Robin Warder, and today I will be doing something a little different and covering two separate missing persons cases from Michigan: the 1990 disappearance of Paige Renkowski and the 2016 disappearance of Danielle Stizlicki. Other than the fact that they both took place in the same state, there is no direct connection between these two disappearances, but here's why I've chosen this particular format this week. The disappearance of Danielle Stizlicki is a request from a listener named Elena. Danielle, or Danny as she's more commonly known, went missing nearly 7 months ago, and her case has garnered a lot of coverage in the Michigan media. Her supporters have been reaching out to podcasts to cover her story, and my friend Nina Enstead has already featured it on the Already Gone podcast, which is based out of Michigan. I'm also quite happy to feature Danny's story on The Trail Went Cold and give it more exposure, but it's often difficult to do an episode about a case which is so recent. This is still a very active investigation where key pieces of information have been withheld from the public by law enforcement, and new developments could potentially happen at any time. You also don't want to spread misinformation or rampant speculation which could jeopardize the investigation. As a result, there isn't a whole lot to talk about in regard to Danielle Stizlicki's disappearance, so on this minisode, I've decided to pair her case alongside the story of another missing Michigan woman, Paige Renkowski. The reason I selected her is because I've had two other listeners, named Amy and Ellen, request that I cover Paige's disappearance. She has been missing for 27 years, and this remains one of Michigan's most famous cold cases. But before we get started on both these stories, just a brief reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast which alternates between our regular full-length episodes and shorter minisodes like this one. We deliver either a new full-length episode or a new minisode every Wednesday. We're currently available for download on several platforms, including iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music, so if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it. The Trail Went Cold also has its own PayPal account and a donate button on the website. If there's anyone out there who wants to make a donation, we would greatly appreciate it, and we'll be sure to give you a shout-out on a future episode. So with all that out of the way, let us now discuss the unsolved disappearances of Paige Renkowski and Danielle Stizlicki. Our story begins in Michigan in 1990. Our central figure is 30-year-old Paige Renkowski, who works as a substitute teacher in DeWitt Township and lives with her fiancé in the community of Epochs. Paige's mother, artist Wade Renkowski, is planning to go on a trip to Georgia, so on the morning of May 24th, artist made arrangements with Paige to borrow her employer's 1986 Oldsmobile Cutlass Calais and drive her to Detroit Metropolitan Airport for her flight. After dropping her mother off at around 11:30 a.m., Paige drove to Canton Township to visit a friend, and they would spend part of the early afternoon together in Griffin Park. At around 2:30, Paige said goodbye to her friend and went to buy beer from a party store before heading back home to Epochs. But shortly thereafter, something would happen which caused Paige to vanish without a trace. At around 7:30 that night, police received a phone call from a motorist who reported seeing an Oldsmobile Cutlass Calais abandoned on the westbound shoulder of Interstate 96 in Livingston County, about a quarter-mile away from an exit into the town of Fowlerville. Approximately 4 hours earlier, this motorist had remembered seeing a woman speaking to a man outside the Calais, and became concerned when he drove past the location again and noticed that the same vehicle was still parked there. So police went to this spot on I-90, and sure enough, the Calais was abandoned and there was no sign of Paige. The keys were still in the ignition, the vehicle was running, the driver's side door was unlocked, and the radio and lights were on. Not only that, but Paige's shoes and purse were in the car, and all of her money was still inside her purse. The bottle of beer Paige had been seen purchasing from the store that afternoon was also in the vehicle, and it was now open. Unfortunately, since the officer on the scene only thought he was dealing with a broken down or abandoned vehicle, and not a missing persons case, the Calais was towed away before it could be photographed or processed as a crime scene. Though I'm trying to understand the logic of why a broken down vehicle would still have its engine running. Anyway, Paige was officially reported missing. According to everyone who knew her, Paige had no reason at all to disappear voluntarily. She had a close relationship with her mother, a job she liked, and she was engaged to be married in November. There were rumors that she was having some problems with her fiancé at the time, but nothing serious enough to compel her to run away, and her fiancé was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Not to mention that she also deposited a large sum of money into her bank account shortly before she went missing, but never touched it afterwards. Given that the Calais was left running, and Paige's purse and shoes were still inside, the most obvious explanation seemed to be that she was abducted against her will. After her case generated publicity in the media, it wasn't long before investigators started receiving tips from eyewitnesses who remembered seeing her driving on I-96 that afternoon, and some of them shared a similar story to the motorist who originally called the police. At around 3:30 p.m. that afternoon, multiple witnesses remembered seeing Paige speak with a man outside the Calais, and this man was standing next to a maroon or burgundy-colored minivan. Now, this has been the most confusing part of this case for me, as some sources state that Paige was seen speaking to two men, and apparently, there may have even been a third man in or near the van. I can only assume these discrepancies might be the result of conflicting eyewitness testimony. The man, or men, were described as being African American, though they could have been Hispanic. At least one of these men was seen putting his hand on Paige's shoulder. Whoever this man, or men were, it seemed very probable they were responsible for Paige's disappearance, but the big question was, why was Paige pulled over on the side of the interstate to begin with? Like I said earlier, the Calais was found only a quarter mile from the exit to Fowlerville, so if she needed assistance, she wouldn't have had to travel very far. There was nothing noticeably wrong with the Calais, though there was some minor front-end damage. But still, was it really serious enough to compel Paige to pull over and speak with a stranger? The Calais did contain several unidentified fingerprints and palm prints, but none of them could be matched to any suspects. The big issue, of course, is that the vehicle belonged to artist Waite Rinkowski's employer, so many people would have innocently touched that car prior to Paige's disappearance, so trying to pick out her abductor's prints would pretty much be impossible. Over the years, police did look at a couple of promising suspects, including a man who was serving time in prison for carjacking a young woman only weeks after Paige's disappearance. For a while, police seemed pretty certain he was involved, but he did pass a polygraph test, and investigators no longer consider him to be a suspect. A few months after Paige went missing, one of the detectives received an anonymous 2-page handwritten letter containing a hand-drawn map to a location where Paige's remains were supposedly buried. In 2011, cadaver dogs were used to sniff out a possible burial site in Conway Township, about 5 miles north of Fowlerville, but ultimately, nothing was found, and investigators are not even sure they read the map correctly and were searching in the correct area. The investigation is still going strong, and witnesses have been re-interviewed in recent years, but the problem is that since so much time has passed, details from their stories have changed, and many of these eyewitness accounts are now inconsistent with one another. However, the consensus seems to be that Paige was parked on the shoulder of I-96 sometime between 3:15 and 4:30 that afternoon, and at least one unidentified male and a minivan were seen next to her at some point. Multiple composite sketches of the suspect or suspects have been released. Investigators believe Paige likely met with foul play shortly after she pulled over, and there's virtually no chance she's still alive today. But unfortunately, her body has never been found, and no one knows who's actually responsible for her disappearance. So I guess you could say, the trail went cold. Now, before I move on to my analysis of Paige's disappearance, I want to take some time to put the spotlight on a recent missing persons case involving a Michigan woman, 28-year-old Danielle Ann Stislicki, who commonly goes by the name Danny. In 2016, Danny was living in the city of Farmington Hills, but worked for MetLife at the Raleigh Office Center on Telegraph Road in Southfield, a northern suburb of Detroit. At around 5 p.m. on December 2nd, Danny left her workplace in her black 2015 Jeep Renegade. She was planning to meet a friend for dinner, but unfortunately, she never showed up. Since things were slow at work that day, Danny was allowed to leave about an hour earlier than scheduled, so she texted her friend to say she was going to swing back by her place to pack a bag. However, this would turn out to be the last time anyone ever heard from her. In addition to no showing her dinner, Danny failed to show up for work the following day, and did not respond to repeated phone calls and texts. At around 6 p.m. on December 3rd, Danny's friend traveled to her apartment complex in Farmington Hills, and discovered Danny's Jeep Renegade in the parking lot, only 8 feet from her door. The vehicle was locked, but Danny's purse was still inside, and it contained her ID and credit cards. However, her keys and cell phone were nowhere to be found. When Danny did not answer her door, she was officially reported missing. While Danny had texted her friend to say she was heading back to her apartment the previous night, it seems unlikely that she actually went inside, and no one can be certain if she was the one who actually parked the Jeep there. Within a matter of weeks, the Farmington Hills police announced that they believed Danny was the victim of a crime. On December 22nd, police searched the home of a man who lived in the Berkeley suburb of Detroit. This man just happened to be a contracted security guard at the same office center where Danny worked. The house was searched multiple times over the course of the next few weeks, and numerous items were removed, including a mattress and some floorboards. All of the evidence has been submitted for testing to the Michigan State Police Crime Lab, but thus far, none of the results have been publicly released. And obviously, given that this is still a very active investigation of a case which is only 7 months old, a lot of details have been withheld from the public. If you search online, you'll find a lot of rumors and gossip about the security guard, but it's important to note that he has never been publicly named as a suspect. Given the freshness of this case, I will refrain from providing any analysis or personal commentary, but I wanted to get the important details out there. The Farmington police are very passionate about solving this, and have stated that they are trying to put together the pieces of a puzzle. At the moment, there is over $125,000 in reward money for information which leads to a resolution of this case. $50,000 has been provided by MetLife, another $50,000 has been provided by Independence Green Apartments, where Danny resided, and the rest of the money has been raised by a family friend on GoFundMe. I am going to repeat all the key details about Danny Stizlicki and provide contact info for the appropriate authorities at the end of this minisode. But for now, let's get back to the disappearance of Paige Renkoski. Anyway, when Paige initially went missing, investigators looked into the possibility that her case might be connected to the murder of a 30-year-old Michigan woman named Beverly Wavell, which took place 8 months beforehand. Beverly lived in Canton Township, and on the morning of September 18, 1989, she dropped her son off at school. Within 2 hours, Beverly's body would be found on Gottfredson Road in Washtenaw County. She had been shot several times, and her legs were also run over by a vehicle. Beverly's car was eventually found abandoned near Griffin Park, which, as you'll recall, is the same place Paige Renkoski spent the afternoon with her friend before she started her drive home and vanished. Much like with Paige's disappearance, Beverly's keys were still in the vehicle's ignition, and her purse and shoes were inside. It seemed likely that someone murdered Beverly and stole her car, but other than a witness who remembered hearing a gunshot about an hour before Beverly's body was found, there would be no suspects, no motive, and virtually no evidence to work with. To this day, Beverly's killer has never been found, and other than a few old newspaper articles, there is very little information about this case available online. Now obviously, there are some compelling similarities between the two cases. We have 2 abandoned vehicles belonging to a 30-year-old female which were found with the keys in the ignition and the victim's purse and shoes still inside. Paige left Griffin Park before she vanished, while Beverly's vehicle was found near Griffin Park. But of course, the key difference is that Beverly's body was found, while Paige's was not. I couldn't even begin to speculate what the motive for Beverly's murder was. It might have been a carjacking gone wrong, but Beverly was planning to pick up her son at a bus stop in Griffin Park that day, so maybe the killer abducted her from the scene in their own vehicle before driving her out to Gottfredson Road to shoot her. But could both women have been the victims of some thrill killer who picked them at random? Like I mentioned earlier, it never made much sense that Paige decided to pull over to the shoulder of I-96 in order to speak with 1 or 2 strange men, especially since there didn't seem to be anything wrong with her vehicle. One theory which has been pushed around is that the person responsible for Paige's disappearance might have impersonated a police officer and flashed his badge at Paige in order to compel her to pull over. Since Paige's father had experience in law enforcement, she would have respected the badge. In fact, maybe Beverly Wavell's killer did the same thing in order to lure her into his vehicle, or compel Beverly to pull over before he shot her and stole her car. If both women were the victim of a random thrill killer, then maybe impersonating a police officer was part of his MO. But I don't know. If both crimes were the work of the same person, it doesn't make much sense to me that he would leave Beverly's body out in the open, but then go to the trouble of hiding Paige's body. So if I had to guess, I'd be inclined to think that the cases are not actually connected. But even so, what did Paige's abductor do to compel her to pull over to the shoulder of I-96? They could have impersonated a police officer and flashed a badge, or they could have driven in front of Paige and suddenly slowed down, causing her to bump into them, which would account for that minor damage to the Calais front end. However, this scenario reminds me of a case which was once featured on Unsolved Mysteries, the 1996 murder of Alicia Showalter Reynolds, a Baltimore woman who was murdered while driving to Virginia. Alicia's car was found abandoned alongside Route 29 before her body was discovered in a wooded area 2 months after she vanished. During this time period, a bunch of female motorists from the area reported the same story about an unidentified man who would keep honking and yelling at them to pull over because there was something wrong with their car. It's been theorized that this same guy convinced Alicia to pull over, even though there was nothing wrong with her vehicle, and he used this opportunity to abduct and murder her. Now, I'm not saying that the killer of Alicia Showalter Reynolds and Paige Renkoski is the same person, but this sounds like the exact type of scenario which someone could have used to get Paige to pull over on the I-96. Sadly, I agree with the police's belief that Paige was abducted and murdered, and that there's virtually no chance she's still alive today, but her family would still like to find her remains and uncover the identity of her killer, or killers, in order to obtain closure. So if you have any information about the unsolved disappearance of Paige Renkoski, or if you happen to know anything about the unsolved murder of Beverly Wavell, please contact the appropriate authorities. If you have information about Paige's case, Crime Stoppers of Michigan is offering a $2,500 reward, so call their tip line at 1-800-SPEAK-UP. That's 1-800-SPEAK-UP. So I'm now going to share all the key details about Danielle Ann Stizlicki's case. To reiterate, she was last seen after leaving work at MetLife at the Raleigh Office Center on Telegraph Road in Southfield, Michigan at around 5 p.m. on December 2nd, 2016. Danny is 28 years old, 5'5", and weighs 123 pounds. She has brown eyes, brown wavy medium-length hair, and was last seen wearing a sky blue Eddie Bauer jacket, a black zip-up shirt, blue jeans, and burgundy boots. She left work driving a black 2015 Jeep Renegade with the Michigan license plate DGH 8957. Authorities want to know if you might remember seeing anyone drive this Jeep between 5 p.m. on December 2nd and 6 p.m. on December 3rd. The Jeep's keys, which contain a unique key charm of a yellow figure with a green body and yellow legs, are also missing, along with Danny's Samsung Galaxy Core Prime cell phone, which has a rose gold case. Remember, there is currently a reward of over $125,000, so if you have any information at all about Danny's disappearance, please contact the Farmington Hills Police Department at 248-871-2610. That's 248-871-2610. This episode's description is going to be providing a link to finddanny.org, a website devoted to Danny's disappearance, which also has photos of all the items I just described. I'm also providing a link to Nina Instead's Already Gone podcast episode, which goes into more detail about this case, and even features an interview with Farmington Hills Assistant Police Chief. Again, the Farmington Hills Police are working tirelessly on this case and are dedicated to solving it, so hopefully there will be a resolution sooner rather than later. But if you just have your own theory about any of these cases, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email at robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. I just wanted to give out another shout out to the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and my supporters at the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. We've recently received 2 new donations from a pair of listeners named Shay and Matthew, so thank you very much, guys. I also have a special announcement to make. We recently made it to 2,000 likes on our podcast Facebook page, so to commemorate the occasion, we've decided to do the same thing we did when we made it to 1,000 likes. Put up a poll and give you fine listeners the opportunity to vote on a case for us to cover on a future episode. And since the episodes about unsolved mysteries cases are particularly popular, I've selected 10 of the most heavily requested cases from that show for this particular poll. You can find the poll on our Facebook page, and voting will close this coming Friday, June 30th at midnight. So if you haven't voted already, be sure to do so before time runs out. Our page made it to 2,000 likes in less than half the time it took for us to reach 1,000, so we cannot thank you enough for your continued support. I need to provide a big thanks to Miguel Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composes the music you hear on every episode. So have yourself a good week, and join me next Wednesday for a brand new episode of The Trail Went Cold.